My father once told me compassion won't build your future. I believed him, until the day my kindness made me lose everything I thought I needed and gain what I never saw coming. Before I tell you how one small act changed the course of my life, please like this video, subscribe, and comment where you're watching from. Because what I'm about to share with you will shatter everything you think you know about success, power, and what it really means to win in this world. You see, I used to think I had it all figured out. Clara Holt, that was me, 29 years old, former Navy communications officer turned nonprofit strategist. I thought I was living the dream, engaged to Daniel Sterling, son of Arthur Sterling, the industrial billionaire whose name alone could open doors or slam them shut forever. Arthur Sterling, a man so ruthless in business that they said he could buy and sell entire companies before breakfast and still have time to destroy 3 careers before lunch. But here's the thing about dreams, sometimes they're just nightmares wearing pretty dresses. And I was about to find out exactly what kind of nightmare I'd been sleeping through. My father, God rest his soul, never understood why I chose to work with veteran shelters instead of climbing some corporate ladder. Clara, he'd say, his voice heavy with disappointment, you're wasting your talents on people who can't help your career. Compassion is a luxury you can't afford if you want to succeed. Every conversation with him felt like a knife twisting in my chest because part of me, the part that desperately wanted his approval, wondered if he was right. And Daniel? Daniel demanded perfection. Not the kind of perfection that comes from being your best self, but the kind that comes from hiding every flaw, every authentic moment, every piece of your soul that might not fit into his family's golden image. Whatever you do, don't be late, he'd told me 100 times leading up to this dinner. My father measures people by time. He sees lateness as disrespect and disrespect as weakness. The dinner. The dinner that was supposed to change everything. The dinner where I'd finally meet Arthur Sterling face to face, where Daniel would present me like some prize he'd won, where I'd have to prove I was worthy of carrying the Sterling name. The pressure was crushing me, eating me alive from the inside out. I remember standing in front of my mirror that morning, adjusting the cream silk scarf Daniel had given me. It's vintage, he'd said when he presented it to me. A Sterling family heirloom. My grandmother wore it to meet my grandfather's parents. It's meant to bring good luck to women joining our family. But as I looked at myself in that mirror, all I could think was how much it felt like a noose, beautiful and expensive, but still something that was slowly strangling the life out of me. The train that day was delayed. Of course it was. In a city where everything runs like clockwork, the one day I absolutely, desperately needed to be on time, the universe decided to test me. 45 minutes late, and counting. I could feel panic rising in my throat like bile, could imagine Daniel's face when I walked through those mansion doors, could hear his father's voice before I'd even met him, dismissing me as just another failure his son had dragged home. So I got off that train and I started walking. Through neighborhoods that grew wealthier with every block, past houses that turned into estates, past gardens that probably cost more to maintain than most people make in a year. My heels clicked against the pavement like a countdown timer, each step taking me closer to what I thought would be my future, but what I now realize was just another prison with golden bars. That's when I saw him. Sitting near a shuttered bus stop, a man in the remnants of military fatigues. His jacket was faded, torn at the sleeves, but I could see the dog tags catching the light around his neck. He was shivering, not just from the cold, but from something deeper, something that comes from being forgotten by the world you once served. His hands were trembling, and his eyes, God, his eyes held a kind of pain I recognized from my own time in the service. And in that moment, I heard 2 voices in my head, fighting for control of my soul. My father's voice, sharp and disapproving, you can't save everyone, Clara. You have responsibilities. You have a future to secure. Walk away. But then I heard my old commanding officer, Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Martinez, the woman who taught me what real leadership looked like. A soldier's duty never ends, Holt. It just changes uniform. I stopped walking. I know what you're thinking. You're thinking I was stupid, that I was about to throw away everything I'd worked for, everything I'd built with Daniel, for a stranger on the street. And maybe you're right. Maybe I was stupid. But sometimes being stupid is the only way to stay human. I had a coffee in my hand and a sandwich in my purse, my pathetic attempt at lunch since I'd been too nervous to eat all day. I walked over to him, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. "Excuse me," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Would you like some coffee? It's still warm." He looked up at me with these incredible blue eyes, eyes that seemed to hold a lifetime of stories, most of them painful. "I don't need charity, miss," he said quietly, but his voice was kind, dignified even in his refusal. "It's not charity," I told him, and I meant it. "It's one veteran to another." That changed something in his expression. He studied my face for a long moment, and I could see him recognizing something in me, some shared understanding of what it means to serve, to sacrifice, to come home to a world that's moved on without you. I sat down next to him on that cold concrete, not caring what it was doing to my designer dress. I offered him the sandwich, and this time he took it. We sat there in comfortable silence for a few minutes, just two soldiers taking a moment's rest in a world that never stops moving. But then I noticed how badly he was shivering, and without even thinking about it, I unwrapped the silk scarf from around my neck and draped it over his shoulders. "Oh no, miss, I can't take this," he said, his hands reaching up to remove it. "This is too fine, too expensive." "It's just a scarf," I told him, and in that moment, I believed it. I believed it was just a piece of fabric, nothing more. He looked at me with those blue eyes, and something passed between us, some kind of understanding that went deeper than words. "Not to me," he murmured, and the way he said it, the reverence in his voice, made me understand that sometimes the smallest gestures carry the weight of the world. I left him there with my scarf and my coffee, and I ran the rest of the way to the Sterling estate. By the time I reached those imposing iron gates, I was breathless, disheveled, and nearly an hour late. The mansion loomed before me like a judge's courthouse, all stone and shadow, and the kind of old money that never forgives, never forgets. Daniel was waiting for me outside, and I could see from 50 yards away that he was pale with fury. His face was a mask of barely controlled rage, the kind of anger that comes from fear, from knowing that everything you've planned is falling apart. "Where the hell have you been?" he hissed as I approached, grabbing my arm hard enough to leave bruises. "Do you have any idea what time it is? Do you understand what you've done?" "The train was delayed," I started to explain, but he cut me off. "I don't care about the train. I care about the fact that you've embarrassed me in front of my father before you've even met him." His eyes were scanning me, taking in my disheveled appearance, my flushed cheeks, the way my hair had come loose from its careful arrangement. "What happened to you? You look like you've been rolling around in the street." "I was helping someone," I said quietly, and I could hear how weak it sounded, how pathetic. "Helping someone?" His voice cracked like a whip. "You were feeding strays? On the day you meet my father?" That's when he noticed. That's when his eyes went to my neck and his face went completely white. "Clara," he said, and his voice was barely a whisper now, the kind of whisper that comes from absolute horror. "Where's the scarf?" My hand went instinctively to my throat, to the empty space where the silk had been. "I gave it to someone who needed it more than I did." "You gave it away?" The words came out of him like a scream that he was trying to hold back. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" "That wasn't just any scarf, Clara. That was a Sterling family heirloom. That scarf was worth more than most people make in a year. My father specifically told me to make sure you wore it tonight." I stood there, looking at this man I thought I loved, watching him fall apart over a piece of fabric, and I felt something break inside me. Not my heart, that would come later. What broke was my willingness to apologize for being human. "If that was a mistake," I said, my voice steady for the first time all day, "then I'd rather keep making it." He stared at me like I'd just spoken in a foreign language, like I'd become someone he didn't recognize. And maybe I had. Maybe for the first time in our entire relationship, he was seeing who I really was instead of who I was trying to be for him. "Fix your hair," he said finally, his voice cold and distant. "Try to look presentable. Maybe if we're lucky, he won't notice the scarf is missing until after dinner." We walked through those massive front doors in silence, our footsteps echoing off marble floors that probably cost more than most people's houses. The foyer was a monument to wealth and power, all crystal chandeliers and oil paintings of stern-faced ancestors who seemed to be judging me from their golden frames. Daniel led me through a maze of hallways lined with the kind of art you see in museums, past rooms that looked like they'd been frozen in time since the Victorian era. Every step took us deeper into a world I didn't belong to, a world where people like me were servants, not family. Finally, we reached the dining room, and I stopped breathing. The table was enormous, polished mahogany that stretched for what seemed like miles, set with china and crystal that caught the light from a chandelier the size of a small car. At the far end of that table, in a chair that looked more like a throne, sat a man in an impeccably tailored suit. Arthur Sterling. But as soon as I saw his face, as soon as I looked into those calm blue eyes, the world tilted sideways and nothing made sense anymore. It was him. The man from the bus stop. The veteran I'd given my coffee to, my sandwich to, my scarf to. But here he was, clean-shaven, perfectly groomed, wearing a suit that probably cost more than my car, looking like he owned the world. Because he did own a significant piece of it. The scarf, my scarf, the Sterling family heirloom, was folded neatly over his arm. "We've met," he said simply, his voice the same quiet dignity I'd heard at the bus stop, but now carrying the weight of absolute authority. And she passed. Daniel froze beside me. I could feel him processing what his father had just said, could practically hear the gears grinding in his head as he tried to make sense of it. "Passed?" Daniel's voice was barely a whisper. Arthur Sterling stood up slowly, and suddenly the room felt smaller, like his presence was filling every corner of it. "I occasionally take walks through the city in different attire," he said, his eyes never leaving mine. "It's amazing what you learn about people when they don't know who you are." He stepped closer to us, and I could see Daniel shrinking beside me, could feel him realizing that everything he thought he knew was wrong. "Your fiancé," Arthur continued, "saw a man in need and didn't hesitate to help. She gave away something precious without a second thought. She treated a stranger with dignity and respect." He paused, his blue eyes studying Daniel's face. "That son is the kind of character that builds empires. That's the kind of person who deserves to carry our family name." The room was so quiet I could hear my own heartbeat. Daniel was staring at his father like he'd never seen him before, like this man who had raised him was suddenly a complete stranger. "But father," Daniel started, his voice shaking, "she was late. She embarrassed us. She chose compassion over convenience," Arthur interrupted, and there was steel in his voice now. "She chose humanity over punctuality. She chose to see the invisible when everyone else would have walked by." He turned to me, and his expression softened. "That's not embarrassment, Clara. That's honor." I stood there, feeling like I was in some kind of dream, some alternate reality where up was down and everything I thought I knew about power and success was being rewritten before my eyes. "Please," Arthur said, gesturing toward the table, "let's eat. I believe we have much to discuss." Dinner was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. Arthur didn't ask me about my fashion sense or my connections or my ability to plan charity galas. He asked about my service, about the veterans I worked with, about what I'd learned from the men and women who'd given everything for their country and gotten so little in return. "Discipline fades," he said at one point, cutting into a steak with surgical precision. "Training becomes muscle memory, then muscle memory becomes instinct, then instinct becomes habit. But character." He looked up at me, those blue eyes intense and searching. "Character is what remains when everything else is stripped away." Daniel was growing more restless with every passing minute. I could see him struggling to understand this version of his father, This man who seemed more interested in my work with homeless veterans than in my pedigree or my potential as a society wife. Father, Daniel interrupted during one of our conversations about PTSD treatment programs. Perhaps we could discuss Clara's other qualifications. Her education, her connections, her heart, Arthur said simply, and the way he said it made Daniel's mouth snap shut. The rest is just paperwork. As the evening wore on, Arthur told us about his walks through the city, about how he'd started them after his own father died, wanting to understand what real struggle looked like beyond the walls of boardrooms and country clubs. Integrity, he said as we finished our dessert, is a currency the world stopped printing. Except in people like you, Clara. People who still remember what decency looks like. When dinner ended, Daniel and I drove home in absolute silence. The tension in the car was so thick I could barely breathe. I could feel his anger radiating off him in waves, could sense him building up to an explosion that I knew was coming. We made it exactly 3 blocks from the estate before he pulled over and turned on me. "What the hell was that?" he shouted, his face red with fury. "You embarrassed me in front of him. You made me look like a fool." "How?" I asked, genuinely confused. "How did helping someone embarrass you?" "Because you were supposed to impress him with your sophistication, your grace, your ability to fit into our world. Instead, you showed up looking like a homeless person yourself, talking about your bleeding heart charity work, making me look like I can't even pick a proper wife." The words hit me like physical blows. Each one landed with the weight of months of doubt, of trying to be someone I wasn't, of slowly disappearing into the person he wanted me to be instead of the person I actually was. "No, Daniel," I said quietly, and my voice was steadier than I felt. "I didn't embarrass you." I reminded him what family should mean. He stared at me for a long moment, and I could see something dying in his eyes. Not love. I'm not sure that had ever really been there. But the possibility of love, the chance that we might actually build something real together. "You don't understand," he said finally, his voice defeated. "You don't understand what it's like to live up to his expectations, to carry his name, to know that everything you do reflects on him." "You're right," I told him. "I don't understand. Because I was raised to believe that your actions reflect on you, not the other way around." We drove the rest of the way home in silence that felt like death. The next morning, I woke up to find an envelope that had been slipped under my apartment door. Heavy paper, expensive, with my name written in careful script across the front. Inside was a letter and a small bronze medallion on a simple chain. The medallion was inscribed with 4 words, "For seeing the invisible." The letter was from Arthur Sterling. "Dear Clara," it read. "In my 63 years on this earth, I've learned that there are 2 kinds of people, those who see obstacles and those who see opportunities. But there's a 3rd kind, much rarer, that sees human beings. You are that 3rd kind." The medallion was my father's, given to him by a man whose life he saved during the Great Depression. My father never told me the story until he was dying, but he made me promise to pass it on to someone who understood what it means to see the invisible. I believe that someone is you. If you're willing, I'd like to discuss an opportunity that might interest you. A chance to see the invisible on a much larger scale. Respectfully, Arthur Sterling. I held that medallion in my hands and I cried. Not the pretty tears of movie heroines, but the ugly, gut-wrenching sobs of someone who's finally been seen for who they really are. 3 days later, I found myself back at the Sterling estate, but this time I was in Arthur's private study instead of the formal dining room. The walls were lined with books that looked like they'd actually been read, and there were photographs scattered across his desk, not the staged family portraits you'd expect, but candid shots of him with people who looked like they worked with their hands. People who smiled with their whole faces. "I have a proposition for you," he said without preamble. "I'm starting a new foundation. The Sterling Foundation for Veterans Reintegration. I need someone to run it, someone who understands that success isn't measured in dollars, but in lives changed." I stared at him, not sure I'd heard correctly. "You want me to run your foundation?" I need someone who leads with heart, not with fear, he said simply. Someone who sees opportunity where others see problems. Someone who gives away family heirlooms to strangers because it's the right thing to do. The salary he mentioned was more than I'd ever imagined making. The budget he was proposing for the foundation was larger than the entire annual funding of every veterans charity I'd ever worked with combined. But that wasn't what made me say yes. What made me say yes was the way he talked about the work. Like it mattered. Like the lives we'd touch and change were the real measure of success. Like making a difference in the world was not just a nice side effect of having money, but the entire point of having it. I accept, I told him, and for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again. 2 weeks later, Arthur hosted another dinner. This time, it wasn't just family. The table was filled with executives, board members, investors, all the people who made the Sterling Empire run. Daniel was there too, looking uncomfortable and confused, still trying to understand what had happened to the father he thought he knew. Arthur stood up as the main course was being served, and the room fell silent with the kind of respect that real power commands. I want to ask you all a question, he said, his voice carrying easily through the large room. What measures a person's worth? The answers came quickly, predictably. Wealth, influence, legacy, market share, net worth. The usual suspects, the metrics that the business world lives and dies by. Arthur listened to each answer with polite attention, nodding as if he was seriously considering each one. Then he turned to me. Clara? What's your answer? I stood up slowly, feeling every eye in the room on me. These were people who could buy and sell companies before breakfast, people who moved markets with their decisions, people who measured their success in billions. It's what you do when no one's watching, I said simply. It's whether you see a person in need as an opportunity to help or an inconvenience to avoid. It's whether you choose to be kind when kindness costs you something. The room was so quiet you could have heard a pin drop. I could see some of the executives exchanging glances, could practically hear them wondering why Arthur Sterling cared what some nobody nonprofit worker thought about anything. Arthur smiled, and it was the first time I'd seen him look genuinely happy. That, he said, his voice ringing with conviction, is leadership. He gestured for me to remain standing while he continued. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm pleased to announce that Clara Holt will be heading our new national initiative for veterans reintegration. The Sterling Foundation will be investing $50 million in the first year alone, with plans to expand nationwide. The room erupted in polite applause, but I could see the shock on their faces. $50 million. To someone they'd never heard of. For work that wouldn't show up on any profit and loss statement. Arthur wasn't finished. He turned to Daniel, and his expression became serious, almost sad. Son, he said quietly, but his voice still carried to every corner of the room, you failed to see what I was testing for. You measured Clara by all the wrong metrics. You saw her lateness, but missed her compassion. You noticed the missing scarf, but ignored the reason it was missing. You worried about embarrassment, but forgot about honor. Daniel's face was red, but whether from anger or shame, I couldn't tell. Probably both. Leadership, Arthur continued, isn't about demanding perfection from others. It's about recognizing character when you see it, and having the courage to bet everything on it. The dinner continued, but the energy in the room had shifted. People were looking at me differently now, not as Daniel's charity case fiancé, but as someone Arthur Sterling had chosen to trust with his resources and his reputation. After dinner, as people began to leave, Arthur pulled me aside. There will be challenges, he warned me. People who think I've lost my mind, who believe charity work is a waste of Sterling resources. You'll need to prove them wrong. I will, I told him, and I meant it. I know you will, he said. Because you've already proven the only thing that matters. You've proven you understand that power without compassion is just another form of poverty. The foundation launched 6 months later, and within the first year, we'd helped over 3,000 veterans find housing, jobs, and the support they needed to rebuild their lives. The press called it the sterling miracle, but I knew better. It wasn't a miracle. It was just what happened when you combined resources with genuine care, when you measured success by the people you helped instead of the profits you made. My father came to one of our first major events, a gala where we presented statistics on our impact, stories from the veterans we'd helped, testimonials from their families. I watched him listening to a former Marine talk about how our program had literally saved his life, had given him hope when he thought there was none left. After the event, my father found me in the quiet of the empty ballroom. "Clara," he said, and his voice was rough with emotion, "I owe you an apology. I was wrong. About everything." He paused, struggling with words that didn't come easily to him. "You showed me what real success looks like. Not the kind that builds bank accounts, but the kind that builds souls." We stood there in that empty ballroom, surrounded by the remnants of an evening that had raised over $2 million for veteran services, and my father hugged me for the first time since I was a child. "I'm proud of you," he whispered into my hair, and those 4 words healed wounds I didn't even know I'd been carrying. Daniel and I, well, that's a longer story. The truth is, our relationship didn't survive the revelation of who we really were underneath all the pretense and expectations. For a while, he tried to understand, tried to accept this new version of me who put purpose before prestige. But in the end, we both realized we'd been trying to love people who didn't actually exist. It took him almost a year to come to me with an apology. I was in my office at the foundation, working late on a proposal for a new program to help veteran families with children, when he knocked on my door. "I've been thinking," he said, standing awkwardly in my doorway like he wasn't sure he was welcome. "About that night. About what happened." I gestured for him to sit down, but he shook his head. "I need to say this standing up," he said. "I was wrong. About you, about what matters, about what my father was really looking for. I was so focused on impressing him that I forgot to be impressed by you." He paused, running his hands through his hair in a gesture I remembered from our early days together, back when he was more nervous boy than entitled man. "The truth is," he continued, "I was scared. Scared that if you were too real, too authentic, too yourself, he'd see through the image I'd been working so hard to maintain. I wanted you to be perfect because I was terrified of being found wanting." I looked at this man I'd once thought I'd marry, and I felt something I hadn't expected: forgiveness. Not the kind that erases the past, but the kind that acknowledges the humanity in our mistakes. "We were both playing roles," I told him gently. "I was trying to be the person I thought you wanted, and you were trying to be the person you thought your father wanted. Neither of us was being ourselves." He nodded, and I could see relief in his eyes. Do you think we could try again? As who we really are this time?" I thought about it. I really did. Because there had been good moments between us, real moments when the mask slipped and we saw glimpses of who we might have been together. But I knew the answer before he finished asking the question. "I think," I said carefully, "that we both need to figure out who we really are before we can try to be that with someone else." He smiled, and it was sad but genuine. "You're probably right. You usually are." 6 months later, I got an invitation to his wedding. He'd fallen in love with a teacher from a public school in Queens, someone who challenged him to be better instead of perfect, someone who saw potential instead of pedigree. In his wedding announcement, he wrote about learning the difference between impressing people and inspiring them. I sent a gift and a note congratulating him on finding real love. Arthur became more than a boss. He became the father figure I'd never really had. He taught me about leadership that serves instead of demands, about power that lifts up instead of holds down, about success that's measured in lives changed rather than dollars accumulated. The secret, he told me during one of our weekly strategy meetings, is remembering that every number on every report represents a human being. Every statistic is someone's son or daughter, someone's mother or father. The moment you forget that, you stop being a leader and start being just another bureaucrat with a fancy title. Under his guidance, the foundation expanded beyond anything I dared to dream. We opened centers in 12 major cities, partnered with over 200 local organizations, and developed programs that became models for veteran services nationwide. But more than that, we changed the conversation about what success looked like in corporate America. Other companies started following our lead, creating foundations that measured impact instead of just tax benefits, hiring people based on character instead of just credentials. Arthur called it the ripple effect of radical compassion, and watching it spread gave me hope for a world I'd sometimes thought was beyond saving. A year after Daniel's wedding, I met someone. Not at a charity gala or a corporate event, but at a coffee shop near the foundation's main office. He was a social worker who'd brought one of his clients to meet with our intake team, and I overheard him advocating fiercely for a veteran who was struggling with addiction and homelessness. His name was Marcus, and he understood that the work we did wasn't just a job, it was a calling. He'd served 2 tours in Afghanistan before coming home to get his master's in social work, driven by the same sense of purpose that had led me to this path. We started as colleagues, then friends, then something deeper that grew slowly and naturally, without pressure or pretense. He'd seen me at my worst, exhausted from 16-hour days, frustrated by bureaucratic obstacles, heartbroken when we lost someone we were trying to help. And he loved me not despite my flaws, but because of my willingness to feel deeply in a world that often rewarded numbness. When Arthur offered to host our wedding at the estate, Marcus and I talked about it for weeks. The grand gesture felt too much like my old life, too focused on display instead of meaning. What if we had it at your parents' house instead? Marcus suggested. In the garden your mother's been working on for 30 years? So that's what we did. We got married in my childhood backyard, surrounded by the people who'd shaped us, the veterans whose lives had intersected with ours, the colleagues who'd become family. It was small, intimate, real. Arthur attended, of course, and he brought a surprise with him, the silk scarf. He'd had it cleaned and pressed, and he presented it to me as a wedding gift. "I've been saving this," he said with a smile, "for someone who truly understands its value." I wore it that day, not as a symbol of wealth or status, but as a reminder of the moment that changed everything, the choice that led me to this life, this love, this purpose. Arthur's wedding toast still gives me chills when I think about it. "I've learned many things in my 64 years, he said, raising his glass to the small crowd gathered in my parents' garden, but perhaps the most important is this: kindness builds what ambition ruins. Clara and Marcus understand this. They've built their careers on it, their relationship on it, their future on it. They know that the greatest wealth isn't what you accumulate, but what you give away." He paused, looking directly at me with those blue eyes that had seen so much pain and found so much hope. "Every choice leaves a footprint," he continued. "Every decision creates a path that others will follow." Clara's choice to stop and help a stranger changed not just her life, but hundreds of lives since. That's the power of compassion. It multiplies beyond anything we can imagine. As I write this now, 5 years later, I think about that day at the bus stop, about the choice that seemed so small at the time, but ended up reshaping everything. The foundation has helped over 15,000 veterans and their families. We've influenced policy at the federal level, changed how corporations think about social responsibility, inspired a new generation of leaders who measure success by impact instead of income. But the real victory isn't in the numbers, impressive as they are. The real victory is in the individual stories: the Marine who found hope when he thought there was none left, the Navy veteran who rebuilt her relationship with her children, the Army sergeant who discovered that his greatest battles could lead to his greatest triumphs. Every morning when I wake up, I think about my father's words, "Compassion won't build your future." And every morning I smile, because I know now that he was wrong. Compassion didn't just build my future, it built a future for thousands of people who thought their stories were over. The truth is, we're all walking past bus stops every day. We're all encountering opportunities to choose kindness over convenience, humanity over hierarchy, love over fear. Most of the time, we don't even notice them. We're too busy, too focused on our own destinations, too worried about being late for our own important dinners. But sometimes, if we're lucky, if we're paying attention, if we're brave enough to stop and see the invisible, we get the chance to make a choice that changes everything. That day, I thought I was giving away a scarf. I thought I was sacrificing something valuable for a stranger who might not even appreciate it. I thought I was risking everything I'd worked for, everything I thought I wanted. I was wrong about all of it. I wasn't giving anything away. I was receiving the greatest gift of my life, the gift of discovering who I really was underneath all the expectations and pretenses. The gift of finding work that feeds my soul instead of just my bank account. The gift of love that sees and celebrates my authentic self instead of trying to reshape me into someone else's ideal. The scarf wasn't the test. The scarf was just a prop in a much larger story about what we value, what we choose, and who we decide to be when we think no one's watching. But someone's always watching. Sometimes it's a billionaire in disguise, testing the character of his potential daughter-in-law. Sometimes it's the universe itself, offering us chances to step into our better selves. Sometimes it's just our own conscience, keeping score of the choices that define us. Arthur was right about footprints. Every choice does leave a mark, creates a path that others will follow. The question is, what kind of path are you creating? Are you walking toward compassion or away from it? Are you building bridges or walls? Are you seeing the invisible or adding to their invisibility? I know it sounds naive, this belief that kindness can change the world. I know there are people who will read this story and think I'm just another bleeding heart liberal who doesn't understand how the real world works. I know there are days when the problems feel too big, the suffering too vast, the forces of greed and indifference too powerful. But here's what I've learned in my 5 years running this foundation, in my thousands of interactions with people who've lost everything and found it again. Small acts of kindness don't just change individual lives. They change the people who witness them. They change the people who perform them. They change the culture around them, one interaction at a time. The veteran I helped that day at the bus stop wasn't just Arthur Sterling in disguise. He was every person who's ever been overlooked, forgotten, dismissed as someone else's problem. When I chose to see him, to help him, to treat him with dignity, I wasn't just helping one person. I was practicing a way of being in the world that ripples outward in ways I'm still discovering. Last month, I got a letter from a young woman named Sarah. She'd been at that wedding toast 5 years ago. She was the daughter of one of the veterans in our program. She wrote to tell me that she'd just graduated from college with a degree in social work, inspired by what she'd seen at the foundation, inspired by the belief that her life could be measured by the lives she helped change. That's the multiplication Arthur talked about. That's how compassion builds the future my father said it couldn't build. One choice, one moment of seeing the invisible, creating ripples that spread far beyond what we can imagine. So I want to leave you with this challenge, this invitation, this desperate plea from someone who's seen what's possible when we choose love over fear. Look for the invisible people in your life. The ones society has taught you not to see, not to worry about, not to help. The homeless veteran on the corner. The single mother working 3 jobs. The elderly neighbor who hasn't had a real conversation in weeks. The coworker who's struggling with depression. The child who's being bullied at school. See them. Really see them. Not as problems to be solved or inconveniences to be avoided, but as human beings deserving of dignity, respect, and love. And then choose. Choose to stop when everything in you says to keep walking. Choose to help when helping costs you something. Choose to be kind when kindness isn't convenient. You might think you're just giving away a scarf, just buying someone coffee, just taking a moment to really listen. But you might be changing the course of someone's entire life. You might be passing a test you didn't even know you were taking. You might be creating footprints that lead others toward hope. The world tells us that success is about accumulation, money, power, status, influence. But I'm here to tell you that real success is about multiplication. How many lives you touch, how much hope you create, how much love you add to a world that desperately needs it. Every choice leaves a footprint. Every moment offers a chance to see the invisible. Every day gives us opportunities to practice radical compassion in a world that's forgotten what compassion looks like. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you of your own chances to choose kindness, then share it. Share it not because I need the validation, but because someone else needs the reminder. Someone else is walking past their own bus stop right now, deciding whether to see or to ignore, whether to help or to hurry past. Be kind. Be brave. Be the person who stops. You never know when compassion is testing you too. You never know when your small act of kindness might be the thing that changes everything for them, for you, for the world we're all building together, one choice at a time. The invisible are waiting. The question is, will you see them?